Hello everyone, and this is our third segment in the series of lectures about text. And today we're going to deal with intertextuality and allusion and quotation. We finished our previous segment at the point where we spoke of the structure of the text and how texts exist in a connected way in discourses. And we looked at this big notion of discourse, which is a chain of text. However, let's now think of how texts develop in history, not only at this time, though of course we must realize that there are millions and probably billions of texts which are produced by people, by billions of people around the world daily. Most of them disappear because they are just uttered and they are oral texts. However, many texts survive as written text, and therefore we mostly speak about this type of written text now. And now if we just imagine how many texts have been accumulated through history for these thousands of years of human existence, I think it's just daunting. But at the same time, it gives us a good idea of how texts develop. They usually develop on the basis of something said previously. So texts not only exist as a system, not only exist as a web, they also unfold in time as this web. So they are interconnected in many different ways. Sometimes further authors, the younger authors, borrow their ideas from previous texts. Sometimes they borrow the words. Sometimes most often, they borrow ideas and words and sentences from many texts. And sometimes they do not want to borrow, but it's just something which is there in their minds because they have read a lot. And therefore they introduce pieces of thought from the texts they have read into their new texts. So I think we get this mind-boggling picture of how texts are all interconnected together in history. And this brings us to the idea of intertextuality. Intertextuality is an important notion in text linguistics, and it is the shaping of a text's meaning by another text, essential for its interpretation. Put simply, this is a reference to another text. It's important to pay attention to this part of this definition, that one text may be essential, important, for the interpretation of another text. Well, in history we have different attitudes to intertextuality. For example, classical authors and then medieval authors regarded borrowing text without even referring to it, which is borrowing materials from some prior texts, as a good thing to do. The more they borrowed, the better. And really this is so because they accumulate a lot of knowledge. However, in the new time, the criteria for example, academic writing and for authorship, the developed category of authorship, require that we always make an explicit reference to another text if we borrow the direct citation. But still, these are just two attitudes, but they show us that intertextuality has always existed. Sometimes it is just an image which is borrowed. It is just a glimpse of an idea. This intertextuality possesses a big potential for stylistic employment. And now if we look at different types of intertexts, we see that there are two notions: intertext well, the text connected as a web, right? Or a text which is borrowed from another text. And hypertext. The hypertext, we are very well familiar with it from hyperlinks in the internet, on the internet, which is itself a huge macro text full of hypertexts where well, some pages refer to others by means of these hyperlinks. The whole idea of intertextuality is largely based on, I mean as a scientific concept, as an academic concept, is based on the writings by a famous Russian philosopher and linguist, Mikhail Bakhtin, and literary criticist, Mikhail Bakhtin, and then it was later on developed by Julia Kristeva. The idea of Mikhail Bakhtin was that all texts are in dialogue with the other text. They are in dialogue with one another, and they actually appear as a further remark by a further author, which he makes in a dialogue with some previous author. A good example of the stylistic use of this intertextuality is a novel, The Dictionary of the Khazars by Milorad Papic. I think this is a brilliant example of what hypertext or an intertext is, because this is a novel, so this is a piece of fiction, which is written in the style and in the structure of a dictionary. That means that you open it and you find dictionary entries arranged alphabetically. But they all make references to one another in a very clear and intricate way. This is a very complicated system. So you can start reading this novel from any point, from basically any page. And if you read it, it will refer you to some other entries, and then you will follow these entries. And finally, if you read all the entries as hyperlinks, you will read the whole novel. I think this is just an interesting format, an interesting experiment with intertext. Tightly connected with the, closely related to the idea of intertextuality is the stylistic device and just a literary device of allusion, and also as semiotic mechanism as well. So allusion is a reference within a literary work to another work of fiction, a film, a piece of art, or even a real event. So allusion basically is a reference, but it is called like that in the literary context. And another definition of the allusion, which gives us a narrow definition of an allusion, is that this is a figure of speech that makes a reference to people, places, events, literary works, myths, or works of art, prior or contemporary, either directly or by implication. And these are called the allusions proper. So if we make this reference in other words, if we make this reference openly, overtly, it may be called an allusion, but it is not the allusion in the narrow sense, because in the narrow sense it must only be done by implication, when we just give a hint, when we just don't name something directly. So good, well, so some good examples of allusions are, well, the best examples of allusions are those which are given by implication. But sometimes, very often, they are instrumented through by means of proper names. For example, this is the name of once popular musical, American musical, which was called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. You will not be able to recognize, to realize what this musical is about. You will not be able to appreciate the stylistic and the aesthetic value of this musical unless you know the allusion in its title. And the allusion, of course, is to the biblical book of Genesis, and it's about the biblical patriarch Joseph, who was given a beautiful coat by his father, which was multicolored. And the authors of this musical make this reference. Well, in this case, this is an explicit reference to the book of Genesis. So allusions are usually classified by the source of allusion. Well, most often we deal with literary allusions, so when one piece of literature refers to another piece of literature. Well, these on this slide we see two examples of allusions. One of them is from the film The Beautiful Mind, about a famous mathematician, John Nash. And when his friend Charles barges into the room, he says, "The prodigal roommate arrives." Prodigal in Russian is bludny. Bludny сосед по комнате заезжает. And as soon as he said the prodigal roommate, that immediately refers you to the Bible, to the parable of the prodigal son, bludny сын. And in this case, this is a proper allusion because it implicitly refers you to the biblical text. Or, for example, from a short story, a tribute by Coppard, dignity is so much less than simple faith that it is unable to move even one mountain. And these words, faith and move mountains, refers you to the Bible, to the words of Jesus Christ, who said that if you have faith, the sign of a small seed, you will be able to move mountains. Literary allusions very often refer you to religious texts such as the Bible. They refer you to classical literature, for example, in The Guardian. Well, both examples are from The Guardian, from a newspaper article. Choosing between Microsoft and Google must seem like sailing between Scylla and Charybdis for Yahoo, said Krista Quarles. And in this case, the difficulty of choice is shown to us by this allusion to Odyssey. In the book, Odyssey had to sail between two monsters, Scylla and Charybdis. Or, for example, this one. Then she flashed us that minxy Cheshire cat grin over her shoulder and was gone. And this Cheshire cat grin, this nice epithet, is also simultaneously an allusion. I think you can also recognize it very well. This is the allusion to Alice in Wonderland, to the Cheshire cat character in Alice in Wonderland. Or, for example, the name of a show, a TV show, Big Brother is watching you. And the whole phrase, well, if we just refer to Big Brother, this is an allusion. If we say Big Brother is watching you, this is already a quotation. But in both cases, this refers you to 1984 by George Orwell. Allusions are beloved. They are embraced by postmodernist literature, where they like to play with allusions, with different texts. They draw allusions from multiple things. And very often it turns into basically building a new work on warping or on reinterpreting a literary work from the past. For example, a play by Tom Stoppard, a famous dramatist, is called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And this is a story which refers to the story of Hamlet by William Shakespeare, where there were two minor characters, Hamlet's friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, whose task was to accompany Hamlet to England from Denmark and to make sure that he is killed by the king, by the vassal king of the English king, who was the vassal of the Danish king. But Hamlet finds out, reveals the plot, and instead of going with them, he just lets them go and they go to England with a letter from the Danish king which says that the bringers of this note must be executed. So instead of bringing Hamlet to execution, they sail towards their own execution. And this play by Tom Stoppard is based on making these minor characters major characters. So they are the major characters in the play, and the whole situation is seen through their eyes. And this is how this illusion works. But we can already see this illusion in the title. Or, for example, the two more titles by famous 20th century writers, James Joyce, whose novel is called Ulysses. And this is a story from modernity. This is a story from contemporary time, but its structure is defined by Odyssey, because Ulysses is another name, a Latin name for Odyssey. Or, for example, A Farewell to Arms, a famous book by Ernest Hemingway. The title itself is an allusion to the book of Isaiah, who spoke of the time when lions will lie beside lambs and people will say a farewell to arms. It's not only titles and literary works which make allusions. Very often we can see a play with allusions in newspapers. For example, on this screenshot you can see the title of the headline of an article, How Amazon Stole Christmas from the Failing Royal Mail. Well, the wording itself and also this small picture with a green hand on top of it shows us that we deal with an illusion where Amazon is compared to Grinch who stole Christmas. And this is a metaphor, but it's also a clever allusion to this film. Sometimes it is impossible to decipher what is meant unless we know the source of illusion, unless we know what is meant by that. For example, in the Daily Mail, there was this passage about Princess of Wales, I think. However, the most damaging comments Colby makes about the princess is labeling her as Stepford-like royal wife who's too scared to do anything more than photo ops. And this refers us to this 1974 film adaptation of a book about Stepford wives who basically behaved like robots, who were ideal, who did everything they were asked to do. And in this fragment from the Daily Mail, the Princess of Wales is compared to one of those obedient, robot-like serving wives. Well, we've heretofore spoken about allusions, literary allusions, allusions to literary texts, but it's not only that. Allusions can be made to history directly, so basically to historical texts. For example, in this quotation by The Guardian, MPs, members of Parliament, coordinate efforts to limit Henry VIII's powers by forcing government to make concessions or risk humiliating defeat. What kind of powers were they? They were the powers when the government was asking for very big powers, basically, which combined both legislative and executive functions. And this, of course, goes against the main principle of the British government structure nowadays, where these two branches of power, the legislative one and the executive one, must be shared, must be divided between different organs and between different bodies. Newspaper authors, journalists, created this clever, funny term, Henry VIII powers. So super powers which combine the legislative and the executive by referring to Henry VIII, who was an absolute monarch. So he had the power of both Parliament, basically, and the executive, and the head of state. Then two more quotations. There was something preternaturally grave about her, almost Victorian. And of course, we cannot fully appreciate what this girl looked like unless we know what the Victorian ideal was in history in the 19th century during, well, this is the whole set of ethics during the reign of Queen Victoria. She hesitated a moment as if she knew she was being too cool and sibylline. Right? This refers you to history of Rome to sibyls, chaste and strict and upright. So this just shows you how charged the illusion is as a stylistic device. Well, and one more type of illusion that we're going to deal with today is the allusion to art. Sometimes it is a picture which is referred to, well, the visual text, so to speak, rather than a piece of literature or a piece from history. And this is again a quotation from The Guardian. I think that this picture of hundreds of locals and tourists crossing the Grand River looked a bit Bruegelian. And this is a picture of the Neva River in St. Petersburg. And I think if you are left wondering what is Bruegelian about, who on earth is Bruegel, but those of you who are familiar with painting and Dutch and German painting of the Renaissance period, you will probably recognize that pictures by Peter Bruegel the Elder look very much like this photo with a beautiful landscape and miniature pictures of people here on the ice of the river. So I think the author of the article probably referred to this right-hand picture on the right hand of the winter in the Dale, and small, tiny figures of people. And another picture by Bruegel in the bottom left-hand corner. You'll probably see that, well, there is something Bruegelian about this photo. So now, very quickly, what are quotations? Because quotations are also connected with the notion of intertextuality and with the notion of allusion. So quotations are phrases that are consciously taken from literature or high oratory. It's not just a hint. It's not just a small element. It's not a word. Usually quotations are sentences or parts of sentences. Where are quotations used? Well, in this course we mainly deal with fiction, but not only. And quotations are important for various genres. Not only are they important for fiction, where they work like gems. They work like gems which were taken out of some other text and put into this beautiful ring of a text, of a new text, to make it more beautiful, to embellish it. But quotations are also important for newspaper articles, because journalists like to support what they say by quotations, and it's part of the function of the newspaper text to quote people, to show you what people in the government said or people in the street said. So this is a stylistic device, or rather the textual device, which is beloved by journalists. But also quotations are figure big in academic writing, because well, a hallmark of a good academic text is that you quote a lot of previous authors and make sure that you quote them, that you make this reference to the prior authors. Well, a couple of quotations in fiction. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. It's very important sometimes to know some famous quotations from classical texts in English, especially for teachers of English, because they are part and parcel of the social cultural context in which people in the English-speaking countries live. So, for example, this one by Keats, or what a tangled web we weave. This is about deception, when first we practice to deceive. This is said when people lie. Ships that pass in the night. This is a quotation from Longfellow about the loneliness of many people. And just to show you how a quotation works in context, this is a quatrain from, again, Longfellow's poem, Psalm to Life. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. And in this poem we see how a quotation from the Bible, dust thou art, to dust returnest, from the book of Genesis, is fit into the poem and therefore works to make it more beautiful. Well, sometimes, this is a curious, a funny, I would say, example of a poem which is based on quotations. This is from a modern poet, Carol Duffy. It is called Mrs. Schofield's GCSE. It was written as a reply, as a response to one of Carol Duffy's poems being taken out of GCSE curriculum because it was supposedly too violent. And she wrote a poem, and then Mrs. Schofield was somebody, a tutor who supported this decision. So she wrote this Mrs. Schofield's GCSE and stuffed it basically with quotations from Shakespeare, where Shakespeare's characters speak of violence. Something wicked comes this way comes, is this a dagger which I see it too? Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. So all of these are quotations from Shakespeare. I'm not quite sure that they are about violence, but still the poem itself is interesting that it's based on quotations. So thank you very much for listening, and in this lecture we looked at intertextuality, allusion, and quotation. Thank you very much.